battlefield was already a graveyard, long before the demon came. Smoke clung to the air, like the breath of a dying god, its acrid sting filling the lungs of those few who yet survived. Broken banners of the Imperium lay half buried in the mud, their once proud Aquilas scorched and blackened. The cries of the wounded had grown faint, replaced now by the low moan of settling ruins and the intermittent crack of distant last fire. And among this ruin knelt Brother Captain Malchior of the Iron Serpents. His once pristine power armor split open along the breastplate, leaking both hydraulic fluid and his own blood in equal measure. For hours, he had fought in silence, his brothers cut down one by one, until the vox was nothing but static, and prayers of defiance became nothing but whispers in his helm. Against the endless tide of the archenemy, courage had become futility, and his faith in the Emperor, once a fire at the core of his being, flickered like a candle in a storm. He felt his body weaken, the ceramite coffin of his warplate now a weight dragging him toward the earth. He could not rise again. It was then that he heard it, not through his vox, not through his ears, but in the marrow of his bones, a voice, gentle at first, as though it had always been present, waiting for him to notice. It did not roar, it did not threaten, it whispered, with the patience of eternity, "You do not have to die here. You need only ask." Malchior spat blood into the inside of his helm. He thought it a hallucination, the creeping fever of blood loss. Yet the voice persisted. "They have abandoned you. Your brothers are ashes. Your emperor is silent. But I am here. I will not abandon you." He wanted to scream, but the breath in his lungs was gone. Instead, he thought words in silence, and the voice answered as though it were his own reflection. "What are you? Freedom, strength, the means to stand again, the power to make the galaxy tremble. Call to me, and I shall answer." A flicker of shame crawled across his mind. He was an Astartes, sworn to eternal loyalty, bred for faith unyielding. Yet here, in the pit, where every oath had turned to dust, temptation wrapped around his thoughts like a serpent. He could almost see it in the air before him. A coil of smoke, with eyes glowing from within. His wounds pulsed, his breath came ragged, and he realized he wanted it. He wanted to rise. He wanted to kill again, to avenge his brothers, to crush those who had left him broken in the dirt. The voice deepened, its tone now velvet laced with iron. "Say the word, Malchior. Invite me, and together we will not only rise, we will never fall again." And so the moment stretched, longer than lifetimes, balanced on the edge of a single whisper. A warrior, bred to resist all corruption, found himself wavering. Was this weakness, or was this simply truth revealed? The corpse of the Emperor upon Terra had never once spoken to him, had never once answered his prayers. But this voice, alien, cruel, perhaps, yet it offered him life. When he opened his lips to speak, it was not prayer that came forth. "I invite you." The words hung in the air, carried not by vox or sound, but by the very pulse of his heart. And the battlefield answered. The smoke thickened, the air turned cold, and the ground beneath him trembled, as if something vast and unseen had drawn nearer. His body convulsed, every nerve igniting in agony, as though his very blood sought to escape him. Yet within the agony came ecstasy, a surge of strength that was not his own, rushing into the cracks of his breaking soul. "Yes," the voice sighed, now no longer distant, but inside him. fused to every thought. Yes, you are mine, and I am yours. The invitation was complete, and Brother Captain Malchior ceased to be alone. The battlefield was already a graveyard, long before the demon came. Smoke clung to the air, like the breath of a dying god, its acrid sting filling the lungs of those few who yet survived. Broken banners of the Imperium lay half buried in the mud, their once proud Aquilus scorched and blackened. The cries of the wounded had grown faint, replaced now by the low moan of settling ruins and the intermittent crack of distant last fire. And among this ruin knelt Brother Captain Malchior of the Iron Serpents. His once pristine power armor split open along the breastplate, leaking both hydraulic fluid and his own blood in equal measure. For hours, he had fought in silence, his brothers cut down one by one, until the vox was nothing but static, and prayers of defiance became nothing but whispers in his helm. Against the endless tide of the archenemy, courage had become futility, and his faith in the Emperor, once a fire at the core of his being, flickered like a candle in a storm. He felt his body weaken, the ceramite coffin of his warplate now a weight dragging him toward the earth. He could not rise again. It was then that he heard it, not through his vox, not through his ears, but in the marrow of his bones, a voice, gentle at first, as though it had always been present, waiting for him to notice. It did not roar, it did not threaten, it whispered, with the patience of eternity, "You do not have to die here. You need only ask." Malchior spat blood into the inside of his helm. He thought it a hallucination, the creeping fever of blood loss. Yet the voice persisted. "They have abandoned you. Your brothers are ashes. Your emperor is silent. But I am here. I will not abandon you." He wanted to scream, but the breath in his lungs was gone. Instead, he thought words in silence, and the voice answered as though it were his own reflection. "What are you? Freedom, strength, the means to stand again, the power to make the galaxy tremble. Call to me, and I shall answer." A flicker of shame crawled across his mind. He was an Astartes, sworn to eternal loyalty, bred for faith unyielding. Yet here, in the pit, where every oath had turned to dust, temptation wrapped around his thoughts like a serpent. He could almost see it in the air before him. A coil of smoke, with eyes glowing from within. His wounds pulsed, his breath came ragged, and he realized he wanted it. He wanted to rise. He wanted to kill again, to avenge his brothers, to crush those who had left him broken in the dirt. The voice deepened, its tone now velvet laced with iron. "Say the word, Malchior. Invite me, and together we will not only rise, we will never fall again." And so the moment stretched, longer than lifetimes, balanced on the edge of a single whisper. A warrior, bred to resist all corruption, found himself wavering. Was this weakness, or was this simply truth revealed? The corpse of the Emperor upon Terra had never once spoken to him, had never once answered his prayers. But this voice, alien, cruel, perhaps, yet it offered him life. When he opened his lips to speak, it was not prayer that came forth. "I invite you." The words hung in the air, carried not by vox or sound, but by the very pulse of his heart. And the battlefield answered. The smoke thickened, the air turned cold, and the ground beneath him trembled as if something vast and unseen had drawn nearer. His body convulsed, every nerve igniting in agony, as though his very blood sought to escape him. Yet within the agony came ecstasy, a surge of strength that was not his own, rushing into the cracks of his breaking soul. Yes, the voice sighed, now no longer distant, but inside him, fused to every thought. Yes, you are mine, and I am yours. The invitation was complete, and Brother Captain Malchior ceased to be alone. The surge of power did not arrive gently. It came like a tide of molten iron flooding through his veins, searing every fiber of his body with fire that was not flame. His vision fractured into shards of light and shadow, each moment stretched and twisted until time itself seemed to lurch forward in stuttering frames. The world outside his helm flickered between two realities, the broken battlefield of the material plane and a vast expanse of shifting, impossible color that he would later recognize as the warp pressing against his eyes. Malchior tried to draw breath, but felt his lungs swell beyond their natural limits, tearing and knitting themselves anew in the same instant. His bones cracked under the pressure, stretching to hold what now coiled within him. He screamed, though the sound was no longer his alone. From his vox grill burst a layered shriek, a chorus of voices spilling over one another like 100 mouths, crying out through his throat. The sound carried across the dead plain, startling carrion birds into flight and silencing the last pitiful groans of the dying. Inside his mind, there was no silence either. The demon was with him fully now, and it rejoiced in the violence of his suffering. This is the unmaking, little soldier, the breaking of chains you did not even know you bore. Feel it, breathe it, become it. He fell to the mud, gauntlets clawing trenches in the soil as his muscles knotted and expanded. His armor groaned, ceramite seams buckling, as though some monstrous thing within sought to split its shell. His helm cracked down the center, and through that jagged wound, he felt his eyes burn with alien light, hot enough to melt the gore-stained lenses away. He no longer saw the world with human eyes, but with eyes that bled radiance into the dusk. And through that vision, he beheld both horror and majesty. The battlefield no longer seemed a ruin of steel and bone, but a canvas of hunger. Every corpse was a vessel, every fragment of torn flesh a promise of power waiting to be consumed. He felt his tongue elongate, tearing against his teeth, until new fangs jutted from his mouth, sharp as knives, aching to drink. Yet beneath this rising tide of strength, Malchior still lived. His soul had not dissolved. Not yet. He felt the demon pressing against him, like a tide against a dam, its glee intoxicating, its laughter echoing in places no sound should reach. But beneath it all, his own voice whispered in protest, "No, not like this." The words barely had shape, but they were his thoughts, his refusal. The demon heard him and laughed. "Do you think you still have choice? You invited me. You opened the door. Now both of us live here, in the same skin. You are mine, and I am yours. There is no undoing what is done." He tried to muster prayer, to call upon the emperor whose light he had forsaken, but the words would not form. His lips spoke the demon's language now, syllables slick and writhing, each one a scar upon reality. He realized, with a horror deeper than death, that his voice had been stolen forever. Then came the hunger. It clawed at his stomach, not for sustenance, but for violence. He needed to kill, to tear, to taste blood on his tongue. His gauntlets clenched into fists that no longer felt like his own. Talons burst from their fingertips, slicing through ceramite as easily as parchment. And then, in the distance, movement, survivors, Imperial guardsmen, staggering through smoke, unaware of the thing now rising from the mire. Their lace guns glimmered faintly, their boots sank into mud, their heads hung heavy with exhaustion. Malchior saw them, and so did the demon. Both hungered, both reached forward. Inside, he screamed. Outside, his mouth split into a grin that was not his. The invitation had been answered. The first steps of possession were complete, and as he lurched to his feet, body breaking and remaking with every stride, Malchior knew that his torment had only begun. The guardsmen did not notice him at first. They moved in a daze, their fatigues torn, their vox units silent, eyes clouded with the hollow look of men who had seen too much and lived through too little. But the demon noticed them, and in noticing, it howled. The sound echoed through Malchior's skull, like iron dragged across stone, compelling his body forward before he could resist. His legs moved with sudden, unnatural strength, propelling him across the mire in great, lurching strides. The earth splintered beneath his boots. His wounded body should not have moved at all. Yet now it surged like a predator loosed from its chains. The guardsmen finally looked up, and terror spread across their faces. They raised their rifles with trembling hands, las beams flashing through the dusk. Red bolts struck his warped armor, carving shallow burns across ceramite, already fracturing from within. Malchior felt the pain keenly, as though every strike set his nerves ablaze. But the demon twisted that pain into ecstasy. Each impact became a spark of delight, each wound a source of strength rather than weakness. He screamed again, his cry a layered cacophony of voices that sent two men stumbling back, dropping their weapons in panic. He reached the first of them with impossible speed. His claws punched through the guardsman's chest as easily as paper, the spray of blood hissing against his armor. The man's eyes widened, lips shaping a prayer that dissolved into a wet gasp. Malchior watched it unfold in slow horror, watched his own gauntlet rend open a fellow servant of the Imperium, watched the demon within him delight in the man's final twitch. He tried to let go, to withdraw his hand, but his body did not obey. Instead, he tore the guardsman in half, entrails spilling across the ground, steam rising as the warp light from his eyes baked the gore. "Do you see?" the demon crooned, its voice dripping with mirth. "This is what you are now. This is what you were meant to be." The next guardsman turned to flee, but Malchior's warped tongue lashed from his mouth, far longer than it should have been, coiling around the man's leg. With a violent pull, he dragged the soldier screaming into the mud, where his talons descended in a frenzy. Flesh shredded, bones snapped. The man's pleas silenced beneath the gargling laughter of the demon spilling from Malchior's lips. Inside, Malchior howled in protest. These men were not his enemies. They had fought alongside his chapter's warriors, had bled for the same cause, but his body cared nothing for such distinctions now. His hunger did not know loyalty. His rage did not respect banners or oaths. The demon directed his every strike, and he was forced to watch through eyes that burned with alien light. More guardsmen fired, desperate, their shots striking his chest and limbs. One beam cut deep into his shoulder, the flesh beneath sizzling. For a heartbeat, Malchior thought he might stagger, might collapse, and end this nightmare. But the demon roared within, pouring strength into torn muscle, knitting flesh with writhing tendrils that pulsed beneath his skin. The pain was exquisite, unbearable, and yet it made him stronger. He threw himself into their midst, talons slicing, fangs tearing, his laughter mingling with screams until there was no line between predator and prey, man and monster. When the slaughter ended, silence fell again. Steam rose from the corpses littered around him, their blood soaking into the mud. The air stank of charred flesh and promethium residue, the bitter perfume of war. Malchior stood among them, chest heaving, his claws dripping. He tried to close his eyes, to retreat into himself, but his lids no longer obeyed. His vision remained wide, unblinking, the demon unwilling to let him turn away. "You are reborn," the voice said, almost tender now, no longer a pawn of a corpse god. "You are mine, and together we are eternal." But Malchior felt no triumph, only chains, for though he stood tall, stronger than ever, he realized the cruelest truth. His body was no longer his own, and his soul was now a prisoner behind the eyes of a monster that bore his name. And thus began his torment, not in death, but in survival. The battle faded, but the war inside him did not. In the hours that followed his slaughter of the guardsmen, Malchior wandered the broken plain, his movements erratic, his body trembling as though some hidden storm raged beneath the armor. Every step sank into the mud with unnatural weight, his gauntlets twitching as talons retracted and extended without his will. He felt like a puppet strung with 1,000 invisible wires, jerked by hands unseen. His voice, when it came, was not his alone, but a layered duet of anguish and exultation. The demon was no longer content to linger as a whisper in his mind. It spread further, its claws sinking into his marrow, its tendrils weaving through every organ and vein. He could feel it pushing, reshaping him with grotesque patience, like a sculptor working in clay that screamed with each touch. Bones cracked and lengthened, ribs pressed against his armor, until ceramite plates bulged outward, warping under the pressure of his own expanding frame. His tongue, once a weapon in battle, now writhed in his mouth like a serpent, coiling and flexing, too long to be contained. He tore at his helm with clawed fingers, ripping it free to gasp in the night air. What emerged was no longer the face of brother Captain Malchior. His skin rippled, as though alive, patches of it hardening into scales, others splitting open to reveal raw muscle glistening with warp light. His jaw unhinged wider than nature allowed, teeth reshaping themselves into fangs meant for rending. His eyes glowed, twin suns of crimson fire, unblinking and merciless. He staggered, half collapsing, feeling every transformation in agonizing detail. His senses screamed louder than battle ever had. He smelled the iron tang of blood from 100 meters away, heard the frantic heartbeat of carrion animals hidden in rubble, tasted the ash that drifted through the wind as though it were meat upon his tongue. Inside his mind, the demon sang, "This is the price of strength. This is the gift you begged for. Rejoice, Malchior, for your flesh is my canvas, and together we shall paint eternity in the blood of mortals." But he did not rejoice. He clung to what fragments of himself remained, whispering names of his fallen brothers, each syllable a desperate anchor in a sea that sought to drown him. He saw their faces as they died, felt their hands clutch his arm in their final moments, remembered the oaths they had sworn to the Emperor. Each memory burned, but he held them tightly, even as the demon mocked. "Do you think they remember you? Do you think the corpse upon his throne spares thought for your suffering? You are nothing but ash in his great machine." But here, with me, you are eternal. He tried to answer, but his mouth betrayed him. From his throat spilled words in the language of the warp, syllables that warped the air around him, bending it into unnatural shapes. The ground trembled. Small creatures convulsed and died at his feet, and his own ears bled at the sound. He clutched at his helm, desperate to silence himself, but the laughter of the demon rolled through his lungs, rising and falling like a hymn. His armor could not contain him much longer. The pauldrons cracked, one snapping loose as a grotesque limb forced its way free. Slick with blood and sinew, it writhed like a living thing, barbed and dripping, before curling back into his torso. The pain was indescribable, yet worse than the pain was the alien delight that followed, as though the demon savored each fracture, each tear, each mutation. Malchior collapsed to his knees, clawing furrows into the soil, his body spasming as another wave of transformation rolled through him. His voice joined the demon's laughter, though he had not meant to laugh, and in that moment he realized that the torment was not simply what the demon did to him, it was what it made him enjoy. Every shred of agony was also ecstasy, every scream was a hymn, and though his soul recoiled, part of his flesh leaned into it, hungering for more. The unmaking had only begun. The night stretched endlessly as Malchior staggered through the ruins, his every step an act of torment. His body had become a crucible, reshaped with each heartbeat by the demon that now lived within. The pain was constant, not the sudden wound of battle, but a slow, gnawing corrosion, as though every cell of his being were being peeled apart and rewritten in some alien script. He could feel the demon etching itself into his very marrow, remaking his flesh as parchment upon which its will was carved. At times, his limbs bent the wrong way, joints snapping backward before grinding into place again. His once proud chest plate buckled as his rib cage expanded outward, bone pushing against ceramide with the sickening sound of cracking shell. Where the plates split, tendrils of sinew coiled into the air, twitching like the legs of some newborn insect. His hands, once disciplined tools of a warrior's craft, now warped into claws whose tips glimmered with a sheen like obsidian. When he tried to flex them, the talons scraped across one another, sparking faint arcs of warp light. Every change was a desecration, and yet each left him stronger. He could feel the strength of 10 men coursing through his limbs, strength that begged for release, strength that demanded blood to justify its existence. He tried to resist, to recall the oaths he had spoken upon the altar of his chapter's fortress monastery. He whispered the catechisms of hate, the litanies of endurance, but each time, the demon's voice twisted them, mocking the words until they became parodies spilling from his tongue. Hate, yes, hate them all. Endure, yes, endure forever in me. Your litanies are mine now, Malchior. Speak them, and you only bind yourself tighter. He clawed at his throat, desperate to silence the alien syllables that erupted unbidden from his mouth. But his own hands betrayed him, tearing gouges into his neck that sealed instantly, the wounds knitting with tendrils of writhing flesh. He could not even hurt himself. The demon would not allow it. A sudden convulsion racked his body, and he collapsed, convulsing in the mud. His armor split further, black ichor leaking from the cracks. He smelled himself burning, smelled the sweet, acrid stench of his own muscle, charring as warp fire licked from within. He screamed, But the sound was no longer his. It was theirs. Both man and demon cried through the same mouth, a hideous duet of anguish and delight. And then, in a moment of stillness, he saw his reflection. A pool of rainwater had gathered in the crater where he had fallen. Within it, he expected to see his scarred but human face, the visage of an Astartes who had borne the Emperor's light. Instead, he saw a nightmare, his features twisted and stretched, his brow heavy with horned ridges, his jaw bristling with fangs, his eyes, those eyes that had once studied the stars in wonder, were now pits of molten red, glowing with the hunger of the demon. He recoiled, shoving himself back, but the reflection did not vanish. It followed him in the glimmer of every shattered lens, every fragment of glass caught in the ruins. He could no longer escape it. He was no longer himself. The demon purred with satisfaction. Do you mourn your beauty? Do you mourn the symmetry of a corpse god's design? You were clay-shaped to his will, Malchior. But clay cracks. I have reshaped you in truth. No more falsehood, no more disguise. This is what you always were, beneath the armor and the oaths. Look at yourself and rejoice. But there was no rejoicing, only despair. For in that reflection, he realized that his torment was not merely transformation. It was permanence. The unmaking was not a phase to endure. It was the new foundation of his being. The body he had once inhabited was gone, and what stood in its place was neither man nor angel of the Emperor, but a grotesque union that would never again be whole. And in that revelation, Malchior felt a deeper wound than any blade could deliver. The wound of knowing that there would be no return. The hours that followed blurred into a fever dream of torment. Malchior no longer trusted the signals his body sent him, for each one was a lie, twisted by the demon. Hunger gnawed at him, but it was not hunger for food. It was a ravenous craving for blood, for marrow, for the taste of mortal life, ripped fresh from the bone. Thirst burned his throat, but no water could quench it. Only the hot spill of vitae across his tongue would soothe the fire. Even the air itself deceived him, filling his lungs not with oxygen, but with the heady perfume of battlefields yet unmade, a promise of carnage to come. Every sense became a weapon turned inward. His hearing stretched far beyond mortal limits until he could hear the distant crack of rock slides, the faint chittering of insects beneath the soil, the slow shifting of tectonic plates deep within the earth. These sounds came all at once, crashing upon him in a tide that drowned thought in chaos. His sight fractured reality, showing him not only the world before his eyes, but also the seething glow of the warp beneath it. Like a second skin draped over existence, he saw faces in the smoke, leering mouths in the cracks of stone, whispers taking shape in the shadows. Each image clawed at his sanity, reminding him that there was no longer a line between real and unreal. When he tried to close his eyes, the demon forbade it. His lids locked open, his gaze forced to linger on horrors until they imprinted themselves upon his mind. Even in darkness he saw, even in silence he heard. There was no respite, no reprieve. His body was no longer a vessel for his will, but an open wound through which the warp poured endlessly. He fell to his knees, digging clawed fingers into the soil, praying for the pain to stop. But the demon was merciless. Why do you resist? This is the truth of existence. The galaxy is not kind, not orderly. It is hunger, it is struggle, it is madness. You feel it now, unmasked. Should you not rejoice? Stop, Malchior whispered. his voice breaking, but the sound was drowned by the demon's laughter pouring from his throat. The flesh of his back split open, fresh limbs, budding like tumors, twitching and grasping at the air. They withered after moments, shriveling back into his skin, leaving behind scars that glowed faintly with warp light. Each birth and death of these limbs sent shocks of pain down his spine, but worse than pain was the pleasure interwoven with it. His body trembled not only in agony, but in a grotesque ecstasy, a violation deeper than any blade could cut. He tried to recall the training of his chapter, the mental fortitude honed through decades of war. He recited the catechisms of focus, the mantras of endurance whispered by chaplains in the shadow of the fortress monastery. But the demon knew these prayers as well. It twisted them as they formed in his mind, turning words of devotion into blasphemies, reshaping litanies into hymns of corruption. By his will you endure, the demon mocked, voice thick with honeyed malice. And whose will is this? Whose gift keeps your heart beating, your bones unbroken, your power unending? It is not the emperor's, little soldier, it is mine. Melchior slammed his head against the ground, desperate to drown the voice in pain. His skull cracked stone, blood dripping from his brow, but the wound sealed instantly, knitting closed as soon as it opened. There was no release in death, no escape in injury. The demon had locked him into immortality of torment, his flesh remade into a prison stronger than steel. And then came the cravings, not merely for blood now, but for sensation itself. His nerves burned to be fed with stimulus, touch, heat, pressure, violence. Every moment of stillness became agony. His claws flexed uncontrollably, carving trenches into the earth as though the planet itself might sate him. When no prey stood near, he hungered for prey to exist, for battle to be unending, for screams to fill the silence. Melchior realized then the true cruelty of his fate. Not only had his body been stolen, not only had his flesh been unmade, but the demon had infected his very desires. What he longed for now was abhorrent, a mockery of the warrior he had once been. His soul recoiled, but his body yearned forward, chained to appetites that could never be satisfied. The flesh was no longer his own. It had become a battlefield where he would lose every war. The night dragged onward, though Melchior no longer trusted the passage of time. The demon had unstitched the hours, replacing them with moments of agony and hunger so complete that minutes felt like eternities, and eternities collapsed into seconds. Yet within that storm of unmaking, there came a silence, a quiet, so sudden, so unnatural, that it chilled him more than the laughter had. It was then that he realized what the demon had done. It had withdrawn, not in defeat, but in malice. Its presence lingered within him, heavy and suffocating, yet its voice fell silent. Melchior remained in control of his thoughts, able for the first time in what felt like years to string together his own memories without interruption. He should have felt relief. Instead, dread pooled in his gut, because with the silence came clarity. He remembered who he was. He remembered the faces of his brothers, their laughter in the fortress monastery's halls, the sermons of the chaplains, the pride of bearing his chapter's colors into battle. He remembered standing before the statue of the emperor, vowing his service, his life, his soul. All of it came flooding back, not as a balm, but as a blade. For now, he saw those memories not as living truth, but as fragile relics crushed beneath what he had become. He raised his gauntleted hands and saw talons where fingers had once been. He felt his chest expand with a breath that tasted of blood and smoke, though no wound lay near. His reflection stared back at him in a pool of stagnant water at his feet. His face twisted, eyes glowing with warp fire, jaw lined with fangs that had no right to exist. Yet within those monstrous features, the demon had left one cruel mercy. His eyes, beneath the burning glow, still bore the faintest trace of their original color, a shard of the man he once was, preserved not out of pity, but out of malice, so that he might never forget. You see it, don't you? The demon whispered at last, its tone softer than before, almost gentle. I have given you a gift. You will never be wholly mine, and you will never again be wholly yourself. You will exist between a broken mirror reflecting what was and what is. This is my kindness. This is my cruelty. Malchior's fists trembled. Rage boiled in him, not only against the demon, but against himself. He had asked for this. He had accepted the invitation in a moment of weakness, and now all eternity would stretch before him as penance. He thought of ending himself, of finding some way to sever this cursed existence. Yet even as the thought formed, the demon mocked him with truth. His flesh would heal from every wound. His bones would reset. His blood would replenish. Death was no longer his to claim. He roared into the night, a sound that split the silence, carrying across ruined stone and shattered machines. It was not the roar of a space marine, nor the shriek of a demon, but something between, an abomination of the voice that made the carrion beasts scatter from the fields. The earth itself seemed to recoil. When the sound faded, the battlefield lay quiet, too quiet, and then, from the smoke, came movement. Survivors. Guardsmen again. This time no more than a handful. Staggering. Wounded. Eyes wide with terror as they glimpsed him in the dark. Malchior froze, torn in two. Part of him screamed to protect them, to remember his oath, to stand as the warrior of mankind he had once been. Another part, louder, stronger, begged to feed. His talons flexed, his mouth watered, his chest ached with hunger. The demon did nothing. It only waited. Malchior stepped forward, torn between salvation and slaughter. Every inch of him burned with choice, with torment, with the cruelty of a fate that left him trapped between what he had been and what he had become. And in that moment, he understood. The demon did not need to strip away the last fragments of his humanity. It only needed to leave them there, like thorns in his flesh, reminders of what he could never return to. That was the true prison. That was the flesh, unmade. The guardsman froze in his shadow. Malchior's claws shook. His soul screamed. His hunger surged, and somewhere deep within him, the demon smiled. The battlefield faded behind him, though the memory of it clung like oil to his senses. Malchior walked, though he could not say where his feet carried him. Each step sunk into earth that seemed neither soil nor ash, but some hybrid between the material and the immaterial. The horizon shifted with every glance, structures blooming and collapsing like sandcastles undone by unseen tides. It was as though reality itself bent to the rhythm of his heartbeat. He did not know if he still walked the mortal realm, or if the demon had dragged him fully into the warp. The sky churned, a sickly canvas of bruised violet and bleeding crimson. Shapes slithered through the clouds, half-born monstrosities whose outlines dissolved the moment they were seen. The air tasted of copper and rot, though no wind stirred. It was a place where time no longer marched, but circled endlessly, and within that circle, he felt his sanity fray like a tattered banner. Yet amid this shifting world, voices began to rise, not the guttural laughter of the demon this time, but familiar voices, brothers in arms. He heard Captain Themis, stern but steady, reciting the litany of battle that had once steadied their hearts. He heard Chaplain Doran, his booming sermons echoing through the cathedral halls of their fortress monastery. He heard the laughter of sergeants, the banter of squad mates, the whispers of camaraderie that had shaped his very being. They called to him, not as memory, but as presence, vivid and sharp enough to cut. He turned, and there they stood, his brothers, whole, unscarred, wearing the armor of his chapter, as though no ruin had ever touched them. Their helmets glimmered with the polished gold of ceremonial rites. Their weapons bore no stain. They looked upon him with the warmth of kinship, and for one fractured instant he believed. "Malchior," Themis said, his voice firm, "you have strayed. Return to us, cast off this shadow, and remember your oath. You are still ours, you are still his." The words cleaved through him, igniting something that had been buried beneath torment. He reached out, gauntleted hand trembling, desperate to bridge the gulf. His chest swelled with hope, with the sudden clarity that perhaps redemption was not beyond him, that perhaps the Emperor had not abandoned him utterly. And then the laughter returned, not loud, not triumphant, just soft, cruel. The vision shattered like glass. His brothers dissolved into smoke, their voices twisting into shrieks, as though flayed alive in the instant of disappearance. The golden armor peeled away to reveal corpses, eyeless, hollow, maggots spilling from the sockets of what had been his kin. They collapsed at his feet, armor rusted, bones brittle, their skulls grinning in mockery. "Did you think it would be so easy?" The demon's voice coiled through his skull, no longer thundering, but whispering, intimate, almost affectionate. "Did you think memory could save you? Memory is mine now. Every oath you swore, every brother you loved, every prayer you whispered, mine. I will give them to you as gifts, and I will take them away again, over and over, until you no longer know which voice is yours and which is mine." Malchior dropped to his knees, claws digging trenches into the ground. He tried to pray, but the words curdled on his tongue, twisting into alien syllables that made the air ripple. He bit his lip until ichor spilled. But even his blood smelled wrong, metallic and sweet, the ichor of something not wholly human. His body no longer obeyed him, his voice no longer belonged to him, and now his memories themselves bent to the demon's amusement. It was a new torment, not the breaking of bones or the rending of flesh, but the slow erosion of identity. He clutched at the remnants of his selfhood, like a drowning man clutching driftwood. He whispered his name aloud, again and again, each time fainter, as though the syllables themselves resisted his claim. "Malchior, Malchior, Malchior." The demon only purred, "Say it as many times as you wish. Names are fragile things. They crack, they fade, they can be replaced. When the last syllable leaves your tongue, you will not even remember who you were." Malchior howled against the sky, but his cry was devoured by the warp, echoing back as laughter that was not his own. The world around him shifted again, and with a lurch, Malchior was no longer on the ruined battlefield, nor the bleeding plains of the warp. He stood instead within the vaulted halls of the fortress monastery, his home, the sanctuary of his chapter. Light streamed through stained glass windows that depicted the emperor triumphant, his golden visage banishing shadow across the marble floors. For a moment, Malchior almost wept. The air smelled of incense, of oil used to anoint weapons and armor. It was perfect, impossibly so, but perfection itself felt wrong. His brothers filled the hall, armored giants in solemn prayer, their heads bowed before the altar where the Aquila spread its wings. He could hear their chants, low and resonant, each syllable familiar, each rhythm carved into his bones by decades of devotion. They did not look up as he walked, their voices steady, as though he did not exist among them. Drawn forward, he approached the altar. Upon it rested not a sacred relic, but his helm, cracked, blackened, still seeping smoke from the day he had first fallen. His heart twisted as he looked upon it, a fragment of what he had been before. Corruption clawed its way into his soul. He reached for it, and the chanting stopped. Every helm turned toward him, hundreds of eyes burning with a golden light that was not their own. Their mouths moved as one, but the voices that came forth were not prayers. They were accusations, layered and venomous. Betrayer. The word struck him like a hammer, echoing in the vault until the glass trembled. Heretic. He stumbled backward, the floor seeming to tilt beneath him. The Aquila above the altar cracked down the center, its stone wings splintering into dust. Possessed. The final word rang like a death knell, and the stained glass behind the altar shattered inward, shards of colored light cutting through the air like knives. Through the wreckage stepped a figure cloaked in fire and shadow. It was shaped like a man, tall and broad, but its form bled into the air, as though reality itself rejected it. Its face was both mask and wound, shifting between countless visages, sometimes Chaplain Doran, sometimes Captain Themis, sometimes his own reflection. It spoke, and though the voice was calm, each syllable pressed into him like a brand. You knelt before him once. You swore your life to his cause. And now, look at you. The figure extended a clawed hand. Tell me, Malchior, was it worth it? Was the strength, the fleeting taste of power, worth the soul you cast away? His throat clenched. He wanted to shout defiance, to deny the charge, but words deserted him. Every memory of that night, the moment he had whispered his invitation into the void, rose like smoke in his lungs. He saw himself, broken and bloodied, whispering prayers not to the emperor, but to the abyss. He had chosen this path, no twist of fate, no betrayal of comrades, no cruel accident of war. His choice. The word tore itself from him, ragged, incomplete. The figure smiled, and its teeth were his own. You do not need to confess. You only need to remember. I will ensure you never forget. The world collapsed again, the monastery's walls peeling away, the voices of his brothers warping into shrieks. He was dragged into another scene, another memory. This time, a battlefield strewn with the bodies of guardsmen, not enemies, not foes, allies, mortals who had fought beside him. They lay torn and broken, their wounds not the work of Xenos or heretic blades, but of claws. His claws. He stared down at his hands, slick with blood, and felt the taste of iron on his tongue. A dozen faces stared up at him from the dirt, pleading, horrified, uncomprehending. One whispered, barely audible through ruined lungs, "Why, Astartes? Why us?" The demon's laughter wrapped around his shoulders like a chain. "Because they must know, Malchior. They must know that you are not their protector. You are their predator, and no matter how far you run, this truth will hunt you." He fell to his knees, covering his ears, though it did nothing to silence the voices. He wanted to gouge out his eyes, to erase the visions, but they burned into him all the same. The fortress monastery, the battlefield, his brothers, the mortals, all of it weaved together, not as memory, but as punishment. And through it all, the demon whispered, patient and certain, "You think these are visions? Hallucinations? They are not. They are the truth of what you are becoming. You can resist, yes. You can struggle, but chains are not broken by denial. They only tighten, and yours tighten with every breath." Malchior's knees pressed into the cracked marble, the cold stone biting through his warped armor. He felt every shard of memory, every flicker of distorted vision, as if they were knives slicing into his mind. And yet, amid the chaos, something stubborn flickered, a fragment of defiance. It was not strength, not power, not hope, only a stubborn ember, a memory of himself standing among his brothers, shoulders squared beneath the heraldry of the emperor, eyes fixed unwaveringly upon duty. The demon noticed. Of course, its laughter was softer now, a velvet rasp that slid through his skull like oil over steel. Ah, there it is, the spark of insolence. How quaint, how human, and yet so fragile. I will not snuff it out. I will teach it to writhe. Malchior's hands curled into fists. For the first time, he spoke aloud, his voice trembling, yet clear. "I am not yours. I am Malchior of the Iron Serpents. I serve the Emperor." The words rang hollow, even to himself. His body had been torn and rebuilt, reshaped by alien will. His claws flexed uncontrollably, his fangs pressed against his lips. His eyes still burned with a red light, not his own. The demon shifted within him, coiling around his thoughts like a predator, pressing, testing. "And yet you speak as if you have freedom. You cannot even control the breath in your lungs. And still you claim to command yourself. You are mine in every fiber. You are mine in every thought." The marble beneath him quaked, the walls of the hall warping and twisting. He saw his brothers again, not as phantoms, but as mirrors, each reflection twisted by the demon to show the consequences of his choices. Every face he had ever loved or trusted, twisted in pain, accusation, fear, each one a lock around his heart, each one a chain tightening. But still he stood, shaking, body thrashing against the remade flesh, and the claws that were no longer fully his. He drew in a shuddering breath, a mantra echoing from memory. "I am Malchior. I am the Emperor's. I endure." The demon snarled, wet, hungry sound that made his bones ache. "You endure, yes. You squirm. You remember who you were. And yet, look at yourself. Your flesh is unmade. Your mind is mine playground. You cannot strike me. You cannot kill me. And you will never be whole." Malchior's thoughts surged against the tide, frantic and wild. He lashed out with his claws, not to destroy, but to feel the resistance, to test the limits of his prison. The air itself seemed to bite back, tendrils of warp light coiling around his limbs, refusing to let him strike, refusing to let him act. Pain and pleasure were indistinguishable now. Every movement was agony, every breath both a relief and a torment. And yet, amid the torment, he discovered something in the briefest flicker of motion. When the demon paused to mock him, a space opened in his mind, a shard of himself, unclaimed, a thought, a memory, a prayer that was only his. He seized it, wrapping it tightly around his consciousness, a tiny lifeline in a sea of unmaking. "You are a fool," the demon hissed, "a deluded fool, thinking one spark can resist the conflagration of eternity." And Malchior smiled, faintly, through the pain, the warp light, the claws, the hunger, not triumph, not victory, but a reminder to himself. The chains could be heavy, the body could betray him, the flesh could rebel, but one thing remained, one thing no demon could claim entirely: his will. It trembled, yes, fragile as glass, but it was still his. And in that trembling spark, Malchior found the first thread of resistance, the first seed of a battle yet to come. The demon had claimed much, but it had not yet claimed all. The air around him shimmered with unnatural heat, the walls of the hall folding and warping until the ceilings hung like molten wax above his head. Every shadow seemed to pulse with malice, each glimmer of light a sharpened edge. Malchior's claws dug into the marble floor, nails carving grooves that glowed faintly with warp light. The demon stirred inside him, coiling and tightening, its voice like silk and steel, all at once. "You cling to what is lost," it hissed. "You call yourself Malchior, yet your flesh is no longer yours. Your blood is not yours. Your mouth no longer speaks only your words. What is left for you to claim?" He drew a ragged breath, tasting the coppery tang of his own ichor, and answered, though the sound was ragged, a mixture of his voice and the demon's. "What is left is me, my mind, my will, my choices. You will not have them." The demon laughed, low and wet, reverberating through his skull. "Choices?" it mocked. "Look at yourself. Every sinew, every bone, every heartbeat reshaped. Do you call this freedom? Do you call this power? You are mine. You will always be mine." Malchior's vision blurred. In his mind, the walls of the hall fell away, replaced by shifting corridors of shadow, each one lined with twisted reflections of himself. There were dozens of Malchiors, some young, unscarred, shining with the Emperor's light. Others, monstrous, claws and fangs gleaming, eyes molten and alive with the demon's fire. They stared at him, accusing, mocking, pleading. Each face was a mirror of what he had been or what he was becoming. He reached out to them, desperate, and one twisted version spoke in his voice. "You cannot fight us. You are already fractured. You cannot reclaim what has been unmade." And yet, another voice, smaller, trembled within the chorus. "I am still here. I am still Malchior." He focused on that whisper, that flicker of self, and in doing so, felt a resistance within his mind, faint but undeniable. The demon roared, a sound that shook his bones and made his teeth rattle. "Foolish, tiny spark, you think a shred of defiance can undo what has been done?" Malchior raised his head, crimson light spilling from his eyes. "I do not claim to undo it, but I will not surrender. Not entirely. Not yet." The demon recoiled, or perhaps it allowed itself to recoil, and in that space, Malchior felt something he had not felt in hours. Clarity, for all its twisting of his flesh, for all its corruption of his body. there remained a part of him untouched, a core that no warp-spawned horror could fully seize. That core pulsed with stubbornness, with memory, with the faint echo of the warrior he had been before he whispered his invitation to the abyss. It tested him then, pressing visions of failure into his mind, his brothers falling again, civilians screaming beneath claws that were his, worlds burning, while he remained helpless, frozen. Each image sought to crush his resolve, to make him forget the fragment of self that still clung to sanity. And he resisted, not with strength. His body had long since exceeded human limits, but with focus, with sheer will. He gripped the fragments of his identity as a drowning man clings to driftwood, holding them close, refusing to release them. He whispered their names in defiance. Themis, Doran, Seraphine. The names were anchors, each syllable a tether, binding him to the self he had not yet lost. The demon hissed in frustration, its presence flaring and contracting like a storm restrained. You amuse me, little spark. Hold on to your delusion if you wish, but every moment you breathe, every heartbeat, every flex of claw and talon is mine to command. Malchior inhaled through his lungs, feeling the unnatural strength and the alien hunger, and whispered again, louder this time. You will not have my mind. You will not have my will. Not while I breathe. Not while I remember who I am. And for the first time since the unmaking began, he felt the demon falter, not defeated, not gone, but staggered, forced to respect that something in him would not yield. The chains were still present, heavy and cruel, but a single link had held, intact, unbroken, glimmering with stubborn life. He stood, claws flexing, body trembling, with alien hunger and power, yet his mind cleared enough to plot, to breathe, to endure. He would not win today, perhaps not tomorrow, but this spark, fragile and fleeting, was proof. The demon had not yet claimed all, and in that proof, Malchior felt a resolve deepen, the first true ember of resistance against the chains that bound him. The world beyond his mind had shifted once more, though Malchior scarcely recognized it as the mortal realm. The air was thick with a metallic tang, wind carrying ash and sparks from fires that seemed to burn without source. The horizon stretched impossibly, buildings of stone and ceramite dissolving into towers of molten light, then recoiling like flesh. Somewhere, faint but insistent, he heard the chanting of the faithful, distant and fractured, echoing from worlds he had never visited yet somehow remembered. The demon within him pulsed, not as an individual presence, but as a tide flowing outward and reaching into the warp with Malchior as its vessel. Every action, every breath, every pulse of his unnatural heart sent ripples across the psychic ocean, waves that could be felt by psychers, by other demonic entities, and by the whispered minds of those attuned to the Emperor's light. Somewhere, perhaps, a lone inquisitor paused, senses pricked by unease, at a disturbance whose origin remained elusive. Somewhere, perhaps, rumors began to form. A warrior, an Astartes of the Iron Serpents, seen and yet unseen, reshaped by corruption, carrying a fragment of demonkind through the galaxy. Malchior did not think of such things. His thoughts were consumed by the relentless churn of sensation and identity within him. And yet, the world around him responded, bending and stretching in ways that defied comprehension. Mountains shimmered as if forged from energy. Rivers boiled into strands of fire, and the stars above pulsed in rhythms that seemed tied to his heartbeat. He realized, with a shiver that was half awe, half horror, that his torment had consequences beyond himself. He was not merely a vessel of suffering, he was a nexus, a bridge between the demon and the universe it sought to warp. Whispers reached him then, low and insidious, carrying fragments of voices he recognized and feared. Some were prayerful, knelt by Adeptus Ministorum acolytes, their litanies pleading for deliverance, for mercy. Others were speculative, cautious rumors carried by rogue psychers and isolated scouts. A space marine, fallen and reshaped, wandering the void of a dead world, limbs fractured and reformed by alien will, yet walking with the intent of a soldier. Even here, in the isolation of his mind and the warped battlefield of the demon, Malchior could feel the ripple of perception. He existed now as both legend and warning, a ghost story whispered through the data slates of manufactorums and the corridors of battle fleets. The demon inside him seemed to notice as well. It coiled, deepening its presence, probing the threads of Malchior's psyche, aware that its influence reached farther than before. "Do you see, little spark?" it whispered, voice curling like smoke through his mind. "Even beyond your agony, you serve me. You are a beacon. All who perceive you will feel the tremors of your change. You are no longer a soldier. You are a signal, a fracture in eternity itself." Malchior's claws flexed, digging into the ash beneath him. He could not escape the truth of it. His unmaking, his torment, the demon that coiled within him, all of it had consequences far beyond what he could imagine. Worlds might shift subtly under its touch. Armies might falter at the edge of perception, sensing a threat they could not name. Entire warp currents could stir with the echo of his existence. Yet, even as he felt the weight of such realization, he held to the ember of his will. He would not succumb entirely, not while that spark remained. Though the galaxy might tremble at the demon's tide, and though his flesh had been turned into something monstrous, there was still a part of Malchior unclaimed, a part that could act, that could resist, that could, perhaps, turn this fracture into something more than torment. The stars above rippled in answer, shifting as if aware of the nexus they now bore witness to. Somewhere, distant and unseen, a whisper spread across the Imperium. A demon-marred space marine, both legend and curse, walking alone, carrying the weight of corrupted eternity, yet still defiant. And though the details were uncertain, though every report was tinged with rumor, all who spoke of him felt the weight of possibility. That a warrior, once loyal to the Emperor, now bore within him a power that could tilt fate itself. Malchior's heart, if it could still be called that, beat on. His claws flexed, his gaze burned, his mind held fast to the spark of identity. Around him, the demon pulsed and waited, aware of the larger stage now set. And though the galaxy did not yet fully understand, the whispers began to converge, a shadow spreading, a fracture widening, a story that would endure beyond memory, beyond sight, beyond reason. Malchior stood amid the shifting landscape, though the notion of standing felt meaningless. The ground beneath him trembled and pulsed, fissures opening to reveal rivers of molten warp light that licked the air like spectral tongues. The stars above were no longer distant indifferent observers, they shivered, quivering, reflecting his heartbeat. The tremors of the demon coiled within him. Every flicker of energy, every whisper of wind, every shadow that moved without source responded to his presence. He was a node in the galaxy, a fracture whose tremors spread beyond perception, beyond measure. The demon stirred, aware of the widening influence, coiling around his consciousness with serpentine patience. "Do you feel it, little spark?" it whispered, voice dripping with velvet malice. "You are no longer alone in your torment. The galaxy itself trembles at your existence. All you endure, all you have become, ripples outward. Every mind that glimpses you, every world that senses you. Mine, they do not yet see you, but they will, and they will learn to fear." Malchior clenched his claws, talons scraping across the warped stone. The thought of his influence, reaching beyond his suffering, should have terrified him. Yet a strange clarity emerged. He saw the threads of causality, not in full, but in fragments. A planet's defenses faltering as he passed unseen, psychers shivering under the pull of an unseen signal, whispers among distant fleets, rumors of a demon-marred Astartes, moving as both predator and warning. He understood that the demon's reach was amplified through him, that the galaxy itself had become both stage and audience to his unmaking. Yet within that clarity, he found defiance. "I may be a nexus, but I am still me," he whispered, voice ragged, a blend of man and monster. "I may carry this corruption, but it does not own my mind entirely." The demon hissed, coiling tighter, probing deeper, its voice caressing and tearing at his psyche. "You are mine in every way that matters, yet you cling to delusion. Clever, pathetic, you resist what is inevitable." He felt the lure of surrender, the whisper of yielding. To give himself over entirely would be easier. The galaxy might bend, but his torment would end. No hunger, no claws, no twisted visions. But Malchior clutched the ember of identity within him, fragile and flickering. He realized that his power, warped as it was, could be a weapon, not only of destruction, but of resistance. Every ripple he sent across the warp, every tremor in the minds of those who glimpsed him, could carry intent. If he could master even a fraction of it, perhaps he could shape this fractured eternity rather than be solely shaped by it. The landscape pulsed again, the fissures widening into channels of molten light that formed into the shapes of his past. Battlefields, fallen brothers, shattered cities, each distorted, each screaming in the demon's voice. He felt the pain of those visions, the gnawing of guilt and fear. Yet, instead of recoiling, he reached into them, forcing his consciousness to touch each fragment, not to destroy, not to heal, but to assert control. Each contact sent ripples back through the nexus of warp, subtle but perceptible. The demon hissed and recoiled, restrained by his will, if only slightly. He understood then the cruel irony. The same demon that had twisted his flesh, reshaped his identity, and tormented his mind had also made him powerful in ways the galaxy could not comprehend. Every suffering it inflicted, every wound it carved into his psyche, amplified the tremors of his existence across reality. The very thing meant to break him had made him a force that could, in some small measure, fight back. Malchior's claws dug deeper into the earth, leaving grooves that shimmered faintly with warp light. His eyes flared, red and molten, Yet within them burned a spark unmistakably his own. He whispered to the universe, a quiet assertion of existence against the tide of corruption. I endure. I am Malchior. I will not be wholly claimed. The demon stirred, patience fraying at the edges. Its coiling tightened. Yet Malchior felt the first true tremor of defiance echo back through the nexus. A single, fragile act. Recognition that he could resist not just for himself, but in influence, in subtlety, in presence. The galaxy was no longer merely witness to his torment. It was now a battlefield for his will, and somewhere in the uncharted depths of the warp and the quiet corners of the Imperium, the whispers began to change. The story of Malchior, demon-marred and fractured, spread not just as legend or warning, but as a question: could one man, reshaped and broken, still claim the threads of destiny, even as a storm of corruption surged through him? The stars above were no longer distant points of light. They pulsed and throbbed like the eyes of a watching predator, mirrors of the warp light that burned within Malchior himself. The ground beneath him, if it could still be called ground, was fractured, a lattice of obsidian and molten ceramite, resonating with the pulse of his unnatural heartbeat. Every breath he drew carried ash and the tang of iron, yet it was also freighted with the whispers of distant worlds, the subtle tremors of fleets in orbit, the anxious prayers of those who sensed his presence even from beyond light years. The demon that had once stalked him from within now coiled around him in a more deliberate, measured way. It was not merely tormenting him anymore. It was watching, learning, testing. Its voice had grown softer, almost contemplative, as though it recognized the shift within Malchior. You have survived longer than expected, it murmured, silk and steel intertwined. You endure because you cling to a shard of yourself. You shape your torment, even as you suffer. Malchior's claws flexed against the fractured stone, his talons leaving trails of warp light that shimmered and then vanished. He could feel the galaxy itself responding. Faint tremors in distant warp currents, whispers of fear and awe threading through psychers and inquisitors. Through the silent corridors of battle fleets, he had become both prisoner and signal, a nexus of influence he neither sought nor fully understood. And yet, in that complexity, he discovered opportunity. The demon hissed, sensing his realization, and pressed harder, probing deeper into his mind. Vision surged. The faces of fallen brothers, civilians he had once protected, the worlds scarred by his claws, and the countless ways in which his corruption could ripple outward, distorting reality itself. It intended to crush him beneath the weight of inevitability, to make him see that he was not a soldier, not a man, not even a fragment of heroism, but a tool in the demon's hands. And yet Malchior did not break. He inhaled through lungs that burned with alien hunger, feeling the warp fire thrumming in his veins, and whispered, almost to himself, I endure. I am Malchior. I will not yield entirely. The demon recoiled slightly, unprepared for the force of defiance threaded through the madness. Do you understand what you have become? It asked, voice a lilt of velvet danger. You are no longer a soldier of the Imperium. You are a fracture in eternity itself, a signal across time and space, a weapon I can wield if you fail to resist. And yet, you resist, curious, foolish, exquisite. Malchior's vision sharpened despite the pulse of warp light, despite the twisted flesh that ached and throbbed with hunger. He began to see patterns in the chaos, the rhythm of warp tremors, the subtle distortions in reality where his presence pressed outward. If the demon sought to use him as a conduit, then he could also manipulate the currents, however briefly, however imperfectly. He was a nexus, yes, but perhaps not merely a vessel. Perhaps he could act, perhaps he could resist, and influence simultaneously. Around him, the fractured landscape began to coalesce into familiar forms. The echoes of his chapter's fortress monastery, the ruined plains where battle had once raged, the distant glow of star systems that had felt the tremors of his passing. Yet each fragment was warped, reshaped, a reflection of the duality that now defined him. Man and demon, warrior and nexus, tormented and resistant. He raised his head, eyes glowing molten red, and let his gaze sweep across the fractured eternity. Somewhere, faintly, he heard the whispers of those who observed him, the rumors carried across data slates, the hushed speculations of psychers and rogue scholars, the anxious prayers of faithful men who could feel, in some distant, psychic sense, the tremor of his existence. All of them were threads he could not yet fully grasp, but threads nonetheless, and the knowledge settled upon him like a weapon and a weight combined. The demon's presence swelled, coiled tightly around his mind, but this time it did not strike. It waited, patient, observing, aware that the final stage of its game had begun. Malchior's claws dug into the warped earth beneath him, teeth clenched, muscles tensed. He was not whole. He would never be whole, but he was awake. He was aware, and for the first time since the unmaking, he understood the truth. He was no longer merely the prey. He was now a player, and somewhere in the infinite weave of reality, a reckoning began to stir. The fractured world quaked beneath him, molten fissures splitting the ground, like the spine of some titanic, slumbering beast. Malchior's claws sank deep into the warped stone, the burn of unnatural strength coursing through every fiber of his reshaped body. Above him, the stars throbbed with pulse and rhythm, reflecting the warp light that flowed through his veins, as if the galaxy itself had become a mirror to his torment. Every breath, every heartbeat sent ripples outward, subtle yet impossible to ignore. The demon stirred within him, coiling tighter, more focused, as if sensing that its game had changed. "You have endured far longer than expected," it hissed, silk and steel intertwined, yet the tide of inevitability is not halted. You are a fracture, yes, but one that cannot escape my grasp forever. Malchior forced himself upright, the muscles of his altered frame straining under the unnatural configuration of bone and sinew. His gaze swept across the warped battlefield, noting the subtle tremors where his influence pressed against reality. Each movement he made, each decision, each pulse of will sent echoes through the warp, bending perception, twisting the flow of psychic currents, hinting at possibilities even the demon could not fully anticipate. "Do you feel it?" the demon murmured, voice wrapping around his skull like molten wire. "All these tremors, all these ripples, they are mine. They are part of me now. You may resist, but the galaxy itself answers to me through you." Malchior's teeth clenched. "Perhaps," he whispered, voice rough and raw. "But if I am a conduit, then I am also a channel. If the galaxy trembles through me, then I can guide that tremor, shape it, resist it. I may be broken, but I am not wholly yours." The demon's form flared, manifesting not merely in his mind, but in the distorted air around him, a towering figure of shadow and fire, its features constantly shifting, some glimpses human, some bestial, all alien. It lashed out, psychic tendrils probing his consciousness, seeking to collapse his resistance, to bend him fully to its will. Each strike was agony, a crushing force against his fractured mind. Yet Malchior braced himself, countering not with brute force, but with stubborn intent. Images assaulted him, brothers slain beneath his claws, worlds burning under his gaze, civilians he had sworn to protect, twisted in fear. Every memory was a weapon, every memory a chain, and yet he grasped for the ember within, the fragment of himself unclaimed by the demon, the stubborn shard of identity that had survived the unmaking. I am Malchior. I endure. I will not yield. The demon recoiled, hissing in frustration. You cling to a spark, tiny and fragile. You are not whole. You cannot be whole. Every movement, every breath is mine to corrupt. Malchior flexed his claws, the warp light in his veins flaring. He pressed his consciousness outward, brushing against the tremors he had once feared, feeling the subtle resonance of the galaxy's response to his presence. He twisted them, nudged them, guided them with intent. The demon surged against him, attempting to wrest control. Yet for the first time, it found resistance it could not easily bend. Foolish, exquisite, and insufferably stubborn, the demon hissed, voice low, almost admiring. You resist, with the very power I sought to enslave. Yet this spark, this defiance, it will be your undoing. Malchior growled, claws digging into the fractured ground, molten light cascading around him. He could not undo what had been done, nor reclaim all that he had lost, but he could assert control, however limited, over the currents that pulsed through him, over the influence that spread outward from his tortured form. Each deliberate action was resistance, each thought a ripple against the tide of inevitability. And as the demon coiled and flared in fury, Malchior felt it, the first tangible proof that he was no longer merely prey, no longer merely a vessel. He was a player, a nexus? Yes, but one with intent, with will, with fragments of agency strong enough to carve meaning from torment. The stars above pulsed, and the galaxy trembled with the duality of his existence, demon and warrior, predator and prisoner, destruction and defiance, entwined in a single, impossible form. And somewhere deep within the shifting currents of the warp, a reckoning began to stir, slow but inevitable, as Malchior's fractured will began to test the boundaries of eternity itself. The fractured sky shimmered and split above him, torn between impossible colors that made the horizon pulse as though it were breathing. Malchior's claws dug deep into the jagged stone beneath him, trailing rivers of warp light that hissed and faded as quickly as they flared. The air itself seemed to hum, thick with the electric tension of raw power, as though the galaxy held its breath, watching the final act of a battle no mortal could fully comprehend. The demon surged within him, coiling tighter than ever, a storm of shadow and fire that stretched both across reality and deep into Malchior's psyche. You persist, little spark, it hissed, voice threaded with silk and venom. Do you know what you face? Every thought, every pulse of your being, I have shaped, I have molded, I have owned, and yet, here you are, insolent, fragile, defiant. Malchior's vision blurred with heat and light, his senses fracturing under the weight of the demon's presence. Memories rose before him, a torrent of faces, voices, and moments twisted into instruments of torment. Brothers slain by his claws, civilians screaming under his distorted gaze, worlds scarred and broken, the weight of inevitability pressed down upon him. A pressure so immense, it seemed to reshape reality itself. And yet, in the center of the storm, he found his ember, the spark of self that the demon could not touch. It was small, flickering, fragile, but it endured. He focused on it, wrapped it in every fragment of will left to him, and whispered through the chaos, "I am Malchior. I endure. I am mine." The demon flared, a maelstrom of wrath and incomprehensible power. Its tendrils of warp light tore through his mind, seeking to crush that ember, to erase the fragment of defiance that remained. "You cannot resist what you are," it hissed. "You are mine in every way that matters. You are predator and prey, servant and vessel, and you will crumble." Malchior's claws dug deeper into the ground, the fissures beneath him glowing with warp energy that he could feel responding to his intent. Pain seared through his limbs, hunger and fire burned through his veins. Yet his mind, though battered and fractured, began to weave strands of control. Every tremor in the warp, every ripple in the currents of psychic energy he carried, he bent with deliberate thought. The demon's own influence became a canvas, a lattice upon which he asserted himself, however small and tenuous that assertion might be. Foolish, exquisite, defiant, the demon purred, almost admiring, its form flaring into impossibility, a shifting nightmare of every face Malchior had ever loved or lost. "You shape what I intended to wield. Yet do you think this will save you? Every breath, every pulse is mine to corrupt." Malchior's eyes flared, molten and red, cutting through the maelstrom of shadow and fire. He inhaled, tasting iron and ash, warp energy and corrupted blood, and let the ember of himself blaze, however briefly, against the suffocating presence of the demon. He pressed his mind outward, brushing against the tremors he had once feared, bending them, guiding them, asserting intent where once there had been only manipulation. Every ripple of influence, every subtle effect across worlds and warp currents became an act of defiance, and the demon recoiled, its tendrils wavering as it realized something it had not fully accounted for. This spark, this fragment of human will, was not extinguished. It was not yet claimed. The chains it had woven within him trembled, threads straining against the insistence of his defiance. Malchior roared, a sound that was half agony, half triumph, resonating across fractured plains, through warped sky and broken stars. He was not whole. He would never be whole. But in this moment, in this storm of shadow, fire, and warp energy, he was alive. He was aware, and he was defiant. The galaxy itself seemed to shiver in response, subtle currents bending, imperceptible tremors spreading through distant worlds, whispered rumors stirring among fleets, psychers, and those sensitive to the warp. The demon had sought to break him utterly, but Malchior had transformed the torment into resistance. He had become more than prey, more than vessel. He had become a force capable of shaping, however imperfectly, the very currents of fate. And as the stars above pulsed with molten light, and the shattered sky twisted under the weight of his existence, Malchior understood the truth of his place. He was a nexus, a fracture, A story whispered across time and space, bound to the demon, yet defiant, a testament to the indomitable spark of will that even the warp itself could not fully consume. The fractured sky trembled, a living lattice of light and shadow, bending to the rhythm of his pulse. Malchior's claws cut into the jagged stone beneath him, leaving trails of warp fire that hissed and vanished, echoes of defiance against a universe that sought to claim him. The demon writhed within him, its presence vast and suffocating, but for the first time, it faced resistance it could not fully dominate. "You endure," it whispered, voice both amused and frustrated, silk and steel intertwined. "You are a nexus, a conduit of my design, and yet you persist. How long, little spark? Can you maintain this illusion of control?" Malchior inhaled, tasting ash, iron, and the alien tang of warp blood in his lungs. "As long as I live," he rasped, voice ragged, yet resolute. "I may be fractured, but I am not yours entirely. I will endure because I choose to." The demon surged, tendrils of psychic fire lashing through the warped air, seeking to crush his resolve, to turn every thought and heartbeat into obedience. Around them, the fractured reality trembled and warped, reflecting the struggle within his mind. Cities folded into mountains, mountains dissolved into rivers of fire, and distant stars pulsed in rhythms that mirrored his heartbeat, all bending to the clash of wills that transcended mortal understanding. Images of his past, twisted and sharpened by the demon's cruelty, assaulted him again. Fallen brothers, civilians struck down, worlds left in ruin. But Malchior, anchored by the ember of identity that had survived every act of unmaking, did not falter. He reached into the chaos, pressing outward with intention, guiding the ripples that spread through the warp, asserting control wherever he could. Each subtle deflection, each deliberate adjustment was an act of rebellion, a claim upon the fragments of his existence that had not yet been consumed. Curious, exquisite, infuriating, the demon hissed, its voice fracturing, as if acknowledging an unexpected truth. "You resist with the very power I sought to wield. You shape the currents, you guide the ripple, but know this, you are still broken. I have already claimed your flesh, your hunger, your claws. Your mind is a battlefield, and I am the tide." Malchior's eyes flared molten red, burning through the storm of shadow and fire. He flexed his claws, feeling the unholy power coursing through him, and yet he embraced the sensation, using it to anchor his will rather than succumb to it. He pressed his consciousness outward, touching the tremors of influence he had once feared, bending them, shaping them, asserting the intent of the ember that remained his alone. The demon recoiled, momentarily unbalanced by a force it could not anticipate. Deliberate resistance infused with awareness. "You are persistent," it breathed, a mixture of admiration and fury. "Perhaps this spark can endure longer than I anticipated. Perhaps you are more than I intended." Malchior's voice, though ragged and harsh, carried conviction. "I am Malchior. I endure. I am mine." He felt the currents respond subtly, the galaxy quivering at his assertion, the warp bending in recognition of a will that refused to be wholly claimed. He was no longer just prey. He was aware, alert, and capable of acting upon the universe in the smallest ways that mattered. The demon, vast and patient, hesitated. Its coiling tendrils, once absolute, wavered in respect for the spark that had survived unbroken. Malchior did not know if it could ever be fully expelled, nor did he claim victory, but he knew this: for all the flesh that had been twisted, all the claws and hunger, all the torment, there remained a fragment of him that no entity could claim. And in that fragment burned the defiance of a warrior, the stubbornness of a soul that had endured through blood, fire, and corruption. Around him, the fractured reality began to stabilize slightly, rivers of warp light calming, the fissures in stone narrowing, the stars' pulses harmonizing with his heartbeat, not completely, not perfectly, but enough to suggest a tentative balance. Malchior had not triumphed, but he had endured. He had not been broken entirely, and that alone was a victory no demon could take from him. And so he remained, claws gripping stone, eyes molten and unyielding, a nexus of power and defiance, caught between the demon within and the galaxy beyond. The whispers would follow him, rumors would spread, and the tremors of his existence would ripple through time and space. Yet he endured, unclaimed, in the one way that mattered, his will. The eternal reckoning had begun, and Malchior, fractured, hunted, and defiant, remained at its center, a living testament to the indomitable spark that even the warp itself could not fully extinguish.